decide to commit suicide or just die of old age. So, besides the front row, anybody recognize what bone that might be?
Humerus.
Besides the front row, besides the front row, besides the front
He's in the
row.
back. He said it first.
Which? It's the humerus, right? This would be the proximal epiphysis region of that, right? Okay, and what is that part called? Anybody has? The greater tubercle, maybe? Okay. All right, so here's where we're making red blood cells, right, in the red marrow of our humerus. That'd be called erythropoiesis, right? And so we're taking our red blood cells, it goes in circulation, and we know they live an average of 100 to 120 days. And when they die of old age and getting worn out, there's this big cool cell called a macrophage. It's found in your spleen and liver and in the bone marrow. And these macrophages sense that these red blood cells are getting close to the end of their life. And they're going to engulf them, they're going to phagocytize them, and we're going to break them in little pieces. We're going to basically take their heme and remove the iron from the heme, right? Remember, that's that part that's in the middle, right? Oops. Right in there. We're going to remove that iron from the heme and allow it to go back into the circulation, and that will make it available to the red bone marrow of our humerus here when I need to make more red blood cells. I can even use the amino acids that made a part of the heme, and I can recycle those so I can make more red blood cells. That's what happens to most of our red blood cells, right? 90% of them get engulfed by macrophages. We phagocytize them, we take the heme and break it into parts, right? Iron and amino acids. You recycle that back into the marrow so I can use it again. All we are going to be worried about is that the remaining part of the heme will go to the liver and be converted into bilirubin, right? The rest of the heme will go to the liver, be converted into bilirubin. That will end up in your large intestine. Right? You don't need to worry about making it into urobilins and sterosibilins. We're just going to call it bilirubin, right, in the large intestine. And that's one of the reasons why your poop is the color that it is. It's all those dead blood cell components and the broken down portions of heme. And you do want to kind of notice the color of your feces, right? You want to notice the color of your urine and the color of your feces. I don't mean pontificate over it and ponder it for like 10, 15 minutes. Like, oh, wow, look at it. Wow, I see Elvis Presley in there. Okay? Just look at it and go, okay, yeah, it looks normal. I'm good. All right? What you don't want is black, tarry looking stools. Right? That's the sign of bleeding. You don't want that. As long as it's a kind of a nice little leather brown to a light tan, you're doing okay. All right? And we'll talk about if it's a floater or a sinker later on. All right? We have a poop discussion coming up. Right? Now, what if, though, your macrophages don't sense the dying of red blood cells, and some of them just spontaneously rupture on their own? Like maybe when they're only 10 days old or something due to some disease. Or maybe because we made your blood really hypotonic. And water went in and they swelled up and just burst. Which can happen, which we'll talk about right a bit later. Well, in that case then, all the parts that were in my red blood cell that are normally picked up by the macrophage are now free-floating in the bloodstream. And a lot of that hemoglobin can't be broken down into iron and amino acids, will end up in the kidney into your urine. Now, part of it will always get in there because this is about 10% of your blood naturally does this. So that's okay, unless it gets really out of hand. But it's also why your urine is kind of that yellowish color. It's due to the hemoglobin that's in there. That was just a consequence of some of your cells dying before they got to a macrophage. And they just released the hemoglobin into your plasma. Now, when we look at that, though, there's some vocabulary. Some when things go wrong a little bit. So the first one up here is hemoglobinuria, right? Hemoglobinuria. We know hemoglobin's broken down, right, into iron and amino acids and recycled to the bone marrow. And that tends to give you a normal yellowish color. But if you start getting lots of hemoglobin broken down into the bloodstream and lots of hemoglobin goes to the kidneys, you start getting kind of a reddish brown urine. That's not good. All right? You don't want reddish brown urine. That means you have an excess amount of hemoglobin in the urine, which means an excess number of red blood cells are popping like popcorn in your bloodstream. That's not good. That means this is a lot higher than 10%. Maybe it's 30 or 40%. The other one is hematuria, right? Hematuria, whole red blood cells in urine. Not good. When we get into the renal system, you'll find out that red blood cells cannot get into the urine. The filtering system is way too small, so the red blood cells won't fit. But are any of you long-distance runners? Amazing. Okay. If you were a long-distance runner, like the guy who just ran the marathon in under 2 hours, if he were to, let's say, if I was operating the first aid station and he came in, oh my God, I'm peeing blood. I said, really? What color? It was red, like cranberry juice. Okay, shut up, have some water. Pounding and running will irritate the kidneys. It inflames them. They become more porous. Big enough now for actually red blood cells to get into the urine. So my only concern is after he comes screaming that he's peeing blood, I'm going to give him maybe a liter of water. Next time he pees, he's going to come back to me and say, yeah, that's like really watered down cranberry juice now. So it's a lot duller in color? Yeah, it is. Here's another liter of water. Comes back and pees for the third time. Is it still there? Yeah, it's just a little teeny pinkish. Good. Inflammation's going down. You're normal. Go away. But if the second urination and the third urination were still cranberry juice, send him to the ER. There's something wrong with his what's called glomerulus, right? But normal pounding, so long distance endurance athletes, like there's this crazy woman, I forgot her name. She likes to run like 200 miles nonstop. Like there's something wrong with her up there. It's just a long way. I wouldn't be surprised if she peed blood for about a half a day, because that constant pounding just irritates her kidneys. Inflammation is quite pronounced. It takes a while for inflammation to settle back down again. But if you do pee red, right, and it was because of a long endurance competition, just make sure that it becomes about half that tone the next urination, half of that half the second time you pee, and gone by the third, and you'll be pretty much okay with that. You all know about jaundice, I'm sure you've heard of it, right? What color do the whites of your eyes turn?
Yellow.
Kind of yellow. Your skin? Yellow. That's just due to a buildup of bilirubin and bile products in the bloodstream. It can even make your breath smell like rotten garlic. So it's quite noticeable in pronounced cases. All right, let's get to the fun part of ABO blood types and see if we can figure out why you guys have the blood types that you have. How many of you know your blood type? Okay, you should. So we're going to figure out why your blood type is what it is. What determines it is what are called antigens on the surface of your red blood cells, proteins. Now, some folks don't simply just call them antigens, they call them agglutinogens. That's a fancy hoity-toity word. We're just going to use the word surface antigens. And there's three major categories of surface antigens. Ones we've labeled A's, ones we've labeled B's, and ones we've labeled D, based upon their shapes. Genetics will determine if you're an A, if you have the A or the B or the D type of antigen. Genetics will determine which of those antigens you have. Now, with that is the other story, antibodies. And antibodies are also determined by your genetics. And antibodies are attracted to antigens. So antibodies will attach to antigens. Now let's do this little mixing matching idea. So I'm A positive. What does that mean, and what does that tell everybody who knows what it means that I'm A positive? It talks about the antigens on the surface of my red blood cell. So if I am type A blood, that means I have the A antigen. There's other antigens there. But we're only talking about the A's and the B's and the D's. It means I have the A antigen on the surface of my red blood cell. Now, automatically, evolution says, all right, if you have the A antigen,
I'm going to give you, and listen to the way I make a rule for my own way to remember this. You will have the antibody for the antigen you don't have. I don't have any B antigens on here. Therefore, evolution gave me the B antibodies. You have the antibody for the antigen you don't have. Because the B antibody, or the B antigen is foreign to my immune system. And it's key to recognize and attack it because it's not a part of my genetic makeup. If I am the type B blood type, that means I have the B antigen on the surface, and automatically evolution says, fine, we're going to make you have the A antibodies. Because you have the antibody for the antigen you don't have. Again, because the A would be a foreign protein to me. Well, what if I have both of them on there? Well, think about the rule that John says. You have the antibody for the antigen you don't have. Which one do I not have? I don't have neither of them. Therefore, I won't have any antibodies. If I had the A antibody, I attack my own blood. If I had the B antibody, I attack my own blood again. That seems kind of stupid. So let's not do that. And again, you have the antibody for the antigen you don't have. What if I'm type O? Which antigen do I not have? I don't have both of them. Therefore, I will have both kinds of antibodies. So which one of these is the universal donor? Why? Why is O the universal donor? Because it has no antigens. There's nothing for antibodies to respond to. If I have the A or the B or the nones, I don't care. I won't recognize that as being foreign. And I'm quite happy with that, or my immune system is. Now, on top of that is yet another type of an antigen. It's called the D antigen. What we just talked about is what's called the ABO blood types. If you're A, you're B, you're AB, or you're O. Those are the ABO blood types. Now this is the D blood type, or the rhesus factor. You know why it's called the rhesus factor?
Because they used rhesus monkeys.
The poor little bastards, yes. They got tortured to all death, and we named this antigen after poor little guys. All right? But again, genetics determine if you have that D antigen. All right? So genetics determine if you have the A, the B, the AB, the O, and then the plus or minus, meaning the D. Genetics determine if you have the A or the B, antibodies, or you don't have any antibodies for the A's and the B's. Now here's where language becomes important. You will have the genes to make the D antibody, right? You will have the genes to be able to make the D antibody. It doesn't mean you're going to be actually making it. You just have the instructions to be able to make it if you need it. Well, then how does your body know you need to make it? You have to be exposed to the D antigen if you don't have it. So if I am A negative, put it right here. So here's my A blood type. I have the A antigen. What antibody do you know I have? I have the B antibody. Awesome. And then there's the space where the D would be, but I don't have it. So I'm an A negative. Well, the rule is you have the antibody for the antigen you don't have. You say, John, you don't have the D antigen. I said, that's true, I don't. But my body doesn't know that it needs to make the D antibody. I have to be exposed to it. So if I have a blood transfusion with someone who was A positive, that blood goes into my circulatory system. My immune system sees the D antigen and says, holy shit, that's foreign. Let's build antibodies against it. Do we have the instructions to do so? Yeah, it's in John's genes right there. Well, wake your ass up and let's make some of these guys. All right? And then months later, I'll have the D antibody. But you have to be exposed to it if you're already negative. Now, if I have the D antigen already, and I get a blood type from an A positive, which also has the D, am I going to make antibodies in the future? No, because I'd be attacking my own blood. Right? So it's really an issue only if you are in minus or you don't have the D antigen. Now let's put that in another context. Talk about moms and little kiddos, or what we call parasites. Oh, they are. You'll see them. They're cute. They might smell nice on one end at least. So let's look at mom. So what if mom was, let's say, A minus, and her first child was A minus as well. Well, now let's make the problem right off the bat. Let's make it a plus. Let's start with the problem right off the bat. Let's get right to the heart of the whole thing. Blood does not really transfer from placenta to mom to baby. There's really no blood transference for the most part. The actual exposure to blood happens during the birthing process and the shedding of the placenta during the afterbirth process. So during birthing, you're going to get vaginal tissue tearing, placental tearing, and there's a lot of bleeding taking place, and so some of the baby's blood, right, will, from the umbilical cord, will go into mom's bloodstream. So let's show some of the A+ going squeezily into mom. Sorry, that's not showing up very well. There we go. So now mom's been exposed to this. But that exposure happened during the birthing process. No big deal, right? Because mom can't make antibodies instantaneously. It takes her months to make these things. So let's say by 6 months later, right, mom now has the antibodies, the anti-Ds. Now here comes her second child. Let's say 2 years later, and her second child was the same blood type as her first child. Was A positive. Mom is still A negative. That's where the problem comes in. Don't have it in color, so we'll just do it this way. The antibodies that mom made after exposure to her first child, which she now has months later, will actually go and attack fetal blood. It actually crosses the placental barrier. Blood cells don't, but the D antibodies will. And now you're attacking fetal blood. You're destroying fetal blood. Now, when antibodies, let's do it this way. What if, because some of you sometimes you can ask, well, what if the baby was B positive and mom was A negative?
Same thing?
Well, would the B antibodies in mom's blood go in? Why not?
They're too big. for
Exactly, they're way too big. They're the size of a Mack truck.
They're IgMs, right?
No, they're tetramers, yeah.
Yeah.
These are like little Mini Coopers, just little sports cars. They can fit right through the membrane. But the A and the B antibodies are way too big. It's just these that are an issue. So as long as mom is a negative blood type, and she has a positive blood type from a child, about 6 months after the birth of that child, she will have developed antibodies against that D antigen, and any subsequent child that has the D antigen on the red blood cells will be susceptible to being attacked by mom's immune system. So that's not going to be a good idea. So we have this drug called Rogam that suppresses mom's ability to produce the D antibody. If she can't produce the D antibody, then there's nothing to cross the placental barrier to attack the fetal blood supply. And they pretty much now just give it to you right off the bat. As soon as you realize you're pregnant, they don't even ask if it's your first or second child. Here, just take some Rogam. We'll just cover our butts. Because what if, unbeknownst to me, I was in an accident, maybe and unconscious, and they gave me a blood transfusion, I wasn't aware, or I forgot about it, and somebody gave me the wrong blood type. Unbeknownst to me, I have now that D antibody in my bloodstream. Or somebody didn't record the medical history correctly. You just cover your butt until we know for sure whether you need it or not. And it's just a kind of a common practice. Now what if, just by strange circumstances, you're out in the middle of, let's say, the Amazon forest doing research on little tree frogs. They got pregnant out there, and you didn't come back until, say, the 7th month of pregnancy, and you know it's your second child, and you know that you have antibodies against that antigen, and there's no Rogam in the country. Actually, no Rogam in the world. It's gone. Got all used up. Well, now you have a problem, right? Because we're now attacking the baby's blood supply. Well, here's the cool thing due to medical science. we can do in utero blood transfusions. Just keep transfusing the blood until the baby can be born. And we can actually do now some fetal heart surgeries before they're born. I mean, that's amazing, right? We just simply keep replacing their blood until they're old enough to survive on their own. Last little bit, and this is a crash course on white blood cells, leukocytes. Number one, they have their nucleuses and they keep their organelles. Remember, red blood cells don't have their nucleuses, and red blood cells don't keep their organelles when they become mature erythrocytes. That's one big gigantic difference with these guys. Secondly, white blood cells can leave the capillaries and go into the tissues. They can leave the capillaries and go into the tissues. Red blood cells can't do that. How do white blood cells know it's time to leave the capillary and invade the neighboring tissues? Neighboring tissues release, let's just do it this way, intercellular signals. Right? A little SOS chemical that says, hey, we're being attacked, or we're dying. That's called chemotaxis, chemical attraction. And the white blood cells go, oh, there's an SOS over here. Let's leave the capillary and we'll go and engulf and kill whatever it is that you're complaining about.
It's the same thing as chemopacking?
No, that's actual chemical. This is the process that describes the ability to be attracted to a chemical, like rheotaxis for movement, phototaxis for light, kind of a thing. Now, how do they get out of the capillary? Something called diapedesis. That's the name that we gave the process of squeezing like an octopus through the walls of the capillary into the neighboring tissues. We just call it diapedesis rather than squeezing between capillary walls. And remember that red blood cells cannot do diapedesis. They can't leave the capillary. They're stuck in there. All right. Who's had micro? These terms sound familiar?
Yeah.
Okay, a much simpler level. Because biologists are anal, we love categories of categories. I take all of your white blood cells and I realize I can lump them into two big groups, all 5 of them. What are called granulocytes and agranulocytes. If you have a granular appearance, you're called a granulocyte. If you don't look granular in appearance, we call you an agranulocyte. Pretty straightforward. Now, of all 5 of my leukocytes, 3 are very phagocytic, meaning they can engulf pathogens or engulf damaged cells. The best ones are the neutrophils. They are your most abundant. And I do want you to appreciate how abundant they are. They're about 60% of your white blood cell count. Then you have eosinophils and monocytes. We're not going to worry about when you have them and how many you have. Just realize those are the other major categories of white blood cells that are found in your blood. And the most abundant are the neutrophils, and all 3 are capable of swallowing and engulfing dangerous things. Do not memorize the pictures of these. I'm not going to ask you to name that thing right there, right? But it's just a visual, so you can see why they're called granulocytes, and then you can remember who are the granulocytes. It will be the neutrophils, it will be the eosinophils, and it will be the basophils. Know the name of who is the granulocyte, but you don't have to recognize them by histological images. And then who are the 2 that are agranulocytes? Well, it's the other 2 you didn't name, right? The monocytes and the lymphocytes. Again, just by name, not by visual recognition of these guys. You like too much out. Shoot. All right, we're done.